All right, chapter 2 of Unlocking Your Family Patterns. We are just now on chapter 2. Isaac and his family tree. If you have this book, you can follow along, and if you don't, it's on Amazon. I will put a link. I think I've already put a link, but I'll do another. What comes to mind when you read the following description? An only child born late in life to wealthy parents who had an overwhelming need for a male heir. Spoiled? Isaac was his name. His birth was remarkable. Over many years and on multiple occasions, God had given his word to Abraham, Isaac's father, that he should have descendants. But decades went by, and Abraham and Sarah was still barren, no kids. And Sarah was 89 and Abraham was 99. So when Isaac was born, he was more than just a loving, awaited fulfillment of a promise. He was a miracle child from God. But Isaac also represented a problem. Many years earlier, out of desperation for the heir, Sarah, following a cultural pattern, had offered her personal servant, Hagar, to Abraham as a surrogate to bear a son in her name. From that union came Ishmael. Hagar's pregnancy created severe dissension. I can't fathom, right? In that household. And only the Lord's direct intervention made it possible for Hagar to remain. Now Isaac's birth rekindled old animosities. Drive out this maid and her son, Sarah raged at Abraham, for the son of this man shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. Isaac's birth had created what today we would call a blended family, right? Hagar, Ishmael, Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac, and there could only be family peace if someone were to go away. The dynamics already presented in Isaac's family when he was born and the incidents that occurred as he was growing up had a profound impact in his life and are part of the reason why a chapter in this book is devoted to him. For through Isaac was a link and a chain of descendants that would reach all the way to the Lord Jesus Christ. He was not immune from dysfunctional influences brought to bear by his family or origin and family tree, just as they would for you or me. Those influences helped him make Isaac who he became, right? So the things we go through create who we are today, good and bad. It's not what we go through, it's how we go through it. It's what we do with those things, right? As we examine the emotional dynamics that influenced Isaac's life, let me emphasize that the goal is not to criticize Isaac. Throughout the Old Testament, Jehovah cited his special love for his people by describing himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie. And it goes on. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had a special, unique relationship to God, right? But there are two sides to Isaac's life. One reflects his walk and obedience to God. The other side, the one which this chapter will focus, reflects the sometimes troubled interpersonal relationships that existed in his life among the members of his family. Again, this is not to suggest that the patriarchs were affected by some sort of Jekyll-Hyde personality disorder, or that they habitually said one thing while doing another. Quite to the contrary, each truly had a heart for God. But like you and me, the patriarchs were humans, we are humans flawed. And we can learn something from others' flaws, right? The patriarchs were the product of their own families of origin and of everyday situations that encountered. They struggled regularly with their emotions and their relationships. Real life, both then and now, is difficult. On this planet, it has always been that way and will continue to until Jesus comes. Okay, so this chapter is to put you in Isaac's state of mind, sort of, to begin to understand it at a personal level. Some of the remarkable events that were recorded in the book of Genesis. Being special often makes being real very difficult. The biographer of the patriarchs does not always tell his story from exactly the same perspective. Sometimes he gives an inside look at the personal struggles those patriarchs experience. At other times, he steps back and allows the reader to draw on his own conclusion from the circumstances that are present. Yet he always presents the patriarchs as real people pursuing their walk with God with admirable wholeheartedness. So keep that in mind as you read the discussion in this chapter of the personal side of the relationship and family styles of the patriarchs in this family. So let's briefly run through a checklist of what the family had to deal with. There was a Father Abraham, had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham, who was desperate for an heir. Okay, so their father Abraham, desperate for an heir, a mother whose identity was wrapped up in a cultural purpose of producing a male child, right? A half-brother, Ishmael, who was despised. A blended family in which Isaac was the favored child. An overly close, fused relationship between Sarah and Isaac that produced dependency, and a traumatic experience between Isaac and his father, Abraham. Gotta kill a wasp. Isaac's near-death experience. To better understand his family system, let's look at the patriarch family tree from Abraham to Jacob. Keep in mind that just as it is difficult for us to sort out all of the influence that have shaped and developed us, it's also difficult to identify all the factors that shaped Isaac's personal history. There is a cultural difference between ours and back then in Genesis history. Many details of the story we would like to know about are not addressed. Nevertheless, one event stands out as overwhelmingly influential in Isaac's years: his near sacrifice on Mount Moriah, at the hands of his father Abraham. That experience must have been traumatizing. Seriously, for real, right? If my dad took me up to an altar and was going to kill me, that would be very traumatic. That experience must have been a turning point in Isaac's life, the kind of experience that a person never forgets, and from which point his life is forever different. The background we've already mentioned: Isaac is the favorite child in the family and has virtually no sibling competition. He's alone. He will inherit his father's wealth. He's been trained all of his life to care for his father's business. In short, he's been prepared for life as the only son of royalty. So it goes on to share a little more, but while bound and laying up on the altar, Isaac must have felt overwhelming confusion as he realizes that he was the sacrifice. Put yourself in that place. Their trauma reshapes a person's life. People are thoroughly different afterward. People are different afterwards. Okay, survivors become more cautious, often less trusting, and at the very least, more aware of their immediate environment. Recovering victims of trauma, especially when loved ones were involved, will tell you their values, such as security, safety, attachment, and predictability, become all important to them. So possibly you have struggled with the question, like, why did this have to happen to him, right? But the question under discussion is that this section of the chapter has nothing to do with why, but rather with how. It's not why God set up this test of faith for Abraham, but rather how that test of faith affected Isaac. Don't mix the two. The event on Mount Moriah was Abraham's greatest test of faith, and his faithful following through placed him in faith's Hall of Fame in Hebrews. This discussion could be had regularly nearly in all of the Christian martyrs throughout history, as well as virtually all the survivors of any modern day trauma. Though we think first of the martyrs themselves, the ones left alive often suffered the most. The trauma repeated. In counseling, victims of sexual and physical abuse, one result after another emerges is their post-trauma struggle to trust others because of their fear that they could again be taken advantage of. It's the consequence of the normal human question, why would you do this to me? Have you ever found yourself there? Why would you do this? Why? And what did I do to deserve this? Since Isaac was human, given the Mount Moriah experience, he naturally would struggle with the concepts of faith and trust. It would be difficult for him to find himself in a place of risk that exposed him to the danger that others might take advantage of him. He would be especially sensitive to the feeling of being deceived or tricked. People who have been abandoned often fear abandonment when none is intended. And Isaac's response to the event on Mount Moriah would have led to simply hypersensitivity regarding issues of deception. It is reasonable to suggest that Isaac, while under the knife, may have felt he had been deceived. After all, on the way up to the mountain, he had specifically asked his father about the missing sacrificial lamb and had received an answer, albeit a puzzling one. It was not until later on the way down the mountain that his father could have filled him in on the details, including the fact that God had directly set into motion this test of faith. Isaac's sensitivity to deceit experienced early in life probably formed the basis many years later for his intense emotional reaction to his son Jacob's trickery in obtaining the birthright and blessing. The conditions of the earlier event on Mount Moriah have an ironic relationship to the conditions in place when Jacob seeks his father's blessing in the experience at Moriah. Isaac could see what was happening. Father, where's the lamb? But his innocent heart could not envision that he would be the sacrifice. When he's old and wise with experience, he's blind and cannot see what's occurring. Earlier with his father Abraham, Isaac could see what was happening but could not comprehend it. Later with his son Jacob, he can comprehend that things are not right but cannot see to verify it. The second experience calls forth the pain of the first experience. So I'm just going to kind of skip down a little bit. When it came to Abraham's daily relationship with people, one might think would matter most the people in his immediate family, and a different picture emerges, just as we do. Abraham had a dark side to his relationship with those in his family tree. For much of his life, he was physically and emotionally separated from his kin. Called of God, Abraham left his family of origin in Haran with no biblical record of ever returning. This sounds like current situations, right? Like current drama, family settings, in-laws. Just saying, like, this sounds so common in the present day. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing that's not already taken place. Even though we look at like times right now And as they keep changing every year, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that is something that would happen, but it's already happened, just in different ways. Earlier, Abraham had separated from his nephew Lot, with whom he had traveled for years. Eventually, he gave up Sarah, denying that she was his wife. This abandonment by denial was more significant because God had already told Abraham that Sarah would bear him a son. In this symbolic abandonment of his family, Abraham revealed himself to be more like us than we would like to admit. When it comes right down to it, all of us have a tendency to be self-serving and self-protective. And I say selfish all the time. I'm totally a selfish human. After Sarah's death, Abraham continued to distance himself from Isaac by producing an entirely different large family through, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. That's all right. What's up, bud? Let's see. Keturah, his new wife, and numerous concubines. Because we do not live in a culture in which women receive their identity almost solely through producing a male child, it's nearly impossible for us to fully understand what happened to Sarah when she finally bore her only son at the age of 90. Not only did she experience the joy of those around her, she experienced the internal joy of achieving at last what she was always supposed to be able to do. She had finally arrived. She had bore a son. So Isaac was undoubtedly important to Sarah. He was important to her because her identity was excessively tied to producing a male child, right? And because he was her only child and the only chance to be a mother. Isaac was her miracle baby. So today, a woman struggling with infertility who finally conceives and bears a son, the only one she can ever have, can relate to the emotions of Sarah. The natural protectiveness she would have had towards Isaac and the pride she would feel towards him. In a real sense, from her point of view, Isaac belonged to Sarah. Sarah loved Isaac. Maybe too much. She needed him. Probably too much. The emotionally charged atmosphere of this mother-son relationship is alluded to Sarah's death. Abraham, the husband who had been married to her for more than 100 years, grieved for the normal period, but not Isaac. Sarah died when Isaac was 37. At 43, after she was gone, when he married Rebecca, he was still grieving. This enmeshment in the mother-son relationship of Isaac and Sarah helped set the stage for the later emotional separation of Isaac from Rebecca. This is deep, guys, okay? Like, this is so deep. But it is such a picture of emotional trauma and the things and the parts and pieces that we don't talk about and we don't address, but they are very real because those things shape us. So it goes on to talk about the dynamics of a rebound relationship. Isaac's marriage was arranged by Abraham. Often individuals who are stuck in the grieving process will not change the environment the deceased person created. They keep the same living arrangements. They drive the same car. They wear the same clothes as though the lost loved one were still present, right? It is easy to imagine that Isaac kept the tent exactly as his mother left it. After all, he had become accustomed to his mother's care and nurture for 37 years. Sarah was probably the most important woman in his life. This loss of his mother, taken together with having an emotional, distant father relationship, coupled with the traumatic experience at the altar, left Isaac, and his separation was made more intense by his father's decision to remarry. That produced another blended family. Over the next 38 years, Abraham fathered at least 6 more sons. Isn't it easy to imagine that at first, marriage to Rebecca was an intense bonding experience? Isaac was lonely and grieving. Rebecca was completely cut off from her family. Initially, they ended up in each other's desperation. It wasn't long, however, before the unfinished business in the relationship of Isaac and his mother became apparent. Rebecca soon realized that she needed to become another Sarah to Isaac as she struggled with her relationship to Isaac and with Isaac's relationship to his mother. Her own identity began to disappear. OMG. How often does this happen? This is like max people pleasing. Along with her failure to become pregnant, Rebecca must have struggled with terrible feelings of inadequacy for the next 20 years. The one thing that she could do for Isaac as his wife, something Sarah as a mother couldn't do, was to provide him with children. And she was failing even at that. The relief of finally becoming pregnant with Jacob and Esau must have been overwhelming for Rebecca. However, she must have anticipated the joy of finally being fully appreciated for who she was. The identity is not in the, no. The kids. Yes, we love our kids, but that is not where the identity is. They're missing it. I'm going to skip through. This is a really long chapter. At his marriage, at the birth of his children, and finally at one of Rebecca's most difficult moments, Isaac continued to abandon his wife. When he was faced with possible death because of Rebecca's beauty, Isaac denied their marital relationship to King Abimelech. His sons, Jacob and Esau, had to have seen this abandonment through denial, for they were young men at the time. Through modeling, Isaac was adversely shaping his son's attitude towards women. Where did Isaac get the idea of abandoning Rebecca? Was it just a common cultural practice? Did it come with his genes? My hypothesis is that Sarah and her inappropriately close relationship to her son Isaac at some point told him about the time Abraham had abandoned her to his very same Abimelech. Even though he must surely have despised Abraham's tactics, Isaac was not above practicing them with his own spouse. A pattern of pain is likely to be passed down the line unless something is done to interrupt it. Because hurting people hurt people, and not intentionally, usually not intentionally. Despising what should be valued in both families, parents, and children, we're learning to despise what is important. Isaac gave up his wife just after Esau actually gave up his birthright. Isaac's abandonment of his wife provided the groundwork for her mistrust of him. She could see that she did not always count with her husband when the chips were down, and Isaac would place his security over hers. That concept, coupled with Isaac's attachment to Esau, pushed her later into taking matters into her own hands. If she could only get the inheritance for her son Jacob, Rebecca's future would be secure. Surely her boy Jacob would take care of her all of her life, even if her husband wouldn't. This devaluating of what is important almost always underlines the development of a family secret. Family secrets. Yeah. As well as contributing to dependency and codependency. The need to have someone in the family responsible for another person's irresponsibility. During the rest of this book, we'll examine these and related topics. Why would Isaac himself be promised a child, a type of Christ in the Old Testament, turn from the child God chose, Jacob, in favor of Esau? Was it only due to his taste for wild game? Though that certainly played a part in Isaac's choice, there were also other factors at work. Here was a chance for Isaac to become vicariously a man's man. Here was the opportunity for this mama's boy to become a hunter through his son's excellent skills. Now he could feel what it was like to take risks. Now he could move out from underneath protection of being the only and favorite son. Now perhaps he could develop some self-identity through his son's achievement. After all, wasn't he Esau's father? The favoritism Isaac showed towards Esau was probably initiated simply fatherly pride in his son's achievements. That's normal for any dad. But it got out of hand when Isaac decided to basically take matters in his own hands. Favoritism in a family is common, and contrary to the opinion many people have, I think that as long as it does not lead to unjust treatment of the children, favoritism is not by itself wrong. Almost every family has a favorite child. That does not mean the parents love that child anymore. They love their other children. It only means that the favorite child fits better with the personality of the parents. They often see things alike or have shared interests that tie them together. Jesus had favorites even among his disciples. The special three are well known for the times they alone shared with the Savior, Peter, James, and John. But it was far more than favoritism that Esau and Jacob faced. On a spiritual level, the birthright given to the younger son reflected God's will that the family line should continue through Jacob, not Esau. On a personal level, the giving of the birthright involved intense competition for parental approval. Even after Jacob had stolen the birthright through deception, Esau still struggled to regain his parents' favor by marrying a woman whom his parents approved. In the passing of the blessing, we see unfinished business, a family secret that goes undiscussed and unaddressed until it flowers into the open. As a result, Jacob leaves the family terrified, and Esau leaves it angry and bitter, with plans in his heart to murder. So if we can step back and look again at the relationship of Isaac and his sons, when the boys were young, we can see the negative patterns in their interaction of the family. In keeping with the culture, Isaac preferred the elder son to receive the family blessing. He regulated Jacob as the second born to his mother to raise. As a result, the first picture we have of Jacob in the scripture is cooking food with the family compound. Within the family compound, the arrangement sets up exactly a replay of Isaac's own family experience. Interestingly, we do not ever see Jacob express remorse over taking advantage of his father's old age and lying to him. After all, wasn't it his mother who had protected him all of his life? Hadn't she always been the one whom he went to when injured or in need, knowing he was the special one? Rebecca surely must have told her favorite son that God had chosen him, as mothers often do, to reassure their children. Inadvertently played into the pattern by repeatedly telling Jacob the story of his birth and selection by God. The rejection Jacob experienced when his father favored Esau would only intensify his questions and deepen his pain. Looking at this situation from a family system view, as long as each child had a parent sympathetic with equilibrium in the family was maintained. It was only when Jacob was able to deceive Isaac and steal the birthright from Esau that the balance of power shifted in the family. Now Jacob had both parents on his side. Esau was cut off. This period prior to the power shift, the family would have appeared to be normal. Things looked good on the outside, that no one would have ever suspected that underlying dynamics would be ripping this family apart that were already in place. For a while it worked. As long as everyone stayed in their role, as long as everyone kept quiet, performed his task, and carried out his life assignment, all was well. But the family structure was rigid, as a result, fragile. When pressures came, as they do, the family shattered. Not only did Rebecca not trust Esau, but Esau came to despise Rebecca. Jacob and Esau's sibling rivalry brought to light rivalry that had existed between the two parents for 40 years. It was a secret, certainly, yet it was a powerful secret in a family that appeared from the outside, at least, to be at peace. How the dysfunction presented in Isaac's family was manifested and handed from generation to generation will be discussed in later chapters, which examines just how patterns are passed down a family tree. Oh my gosh, that was so good. What religious experiences did you have as a child or adolescent that have influenced your relationship with God? Have you ever been able to talk about these experiences with anyone? And if you have not, I highly, highly, highly suggest and encourage you to sit down with someone you can talk to, or a counselor, a mentor, and process that. If we never process the trauma that we go through, we can't move to the next level. Therefore, we cannot be used to the full capacity that God created us to be. Number 2, who is the favorite child in your family? What differences in treatment did the favorite receive? I'm going to plead the 5th. Number 3, if you're a parent, who is your favorite child and why? One time when my kids were little, Anna was really little, separately, I took them outside and I asked Lauren, do you think mommy has a favorite? And she said, and I said, who? And she said, me. And then I took Dustin outside and I said, Dustin, do you think mommy has a favorite? And he said, yes. And I said, who? And he said, me. And then I took Anna outside separately and asked her the same thing. Do you think mommy has a favorite? And she said, yes, me. That made me feel incredibly, incredibly good. But that's when they were really little. So those of you who have teenagers know that probably as a teenager, for myself, speaking for myself, I know I went through periods of time I felt like my parents didn't love me. So do I have a favorite child? No. I do not have a favorite child because I can tell you how incredibly special and loved each of my children are by me. And they're unique, incredible gifts. But I can't say that they don't feel that way. So I don't know. Number 4, what kind of inappropriate relationships exist in your immediate family history? Grandparents, parents, who was inappropriately close, who was withdrawn when it should have been the other way around. What impact did these relationships have on you and your relationship with your spouse? There's the topic. Yes, I have had some inappropriate relationships in my life, and it has deeply affected me, my self-confidence, my relationship with those around me, and especially my marriage. Number 5, how do you feel as you read about and think about dysfunction in the family system of the patriarchs? What have you learned? What concepts can you apply to your own family tree? We could be here a long time on that question, so I'm going to wrap it up for now.